I can't stand introducing people that don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do my best, all right? It's a true pleasure that we've been able to host Joe McNally. Special thanks goes to Nikon USA. We can see Nikon's here. Joe is a Nikon ambassador, and so he been working closely with Nikon. And so at the end, Alex is here, happy to answer any questions about Nikon gear, et cetera. So we really appreciate you being here. Adds another dimension to our lectures. Now, as I like to say, Joe has that dream career that we all sort of fantasize about. You know, flying to exotic locations, working for National Geographic, Sports Illustrated, swimsuit models. And all we see is that one picture on the page. We don't see the lines at airport security. We don't see the tons of gear. We don't see all the phone calls that go into it. We don't see the jet lag. Well, you do see it a little bit on you this week, a little bit. We don't see all the work that goes into the photo beforehand, all right? And so what's great about Joe is with all of that success of having shot for top people for the last 35 years, he's literally just as eager as, you know, I would like to say some of the freshmen here at SVA are, the 17, 18-year-old students. Okay, he still gets up, he still looks out the window, he still tries to figure out what's the light doing, what can I do with it, and really tries to create something very exciting. And I think that's really the inspiration, okay? Also, thankfully, he loves sharing that love for light and love for photography. And we're fortunate for that. He's gracious and generous and a little bit funny. So, on that note, I think we're going to have a great time for about an hour 15 with Joe. And then at the end, there'll be a special announcement about why you have all been stamped and why we collected all of your DNA. Okay? So on the note, please help me welcome Joe McNally.
Okay, I think this is the microphone that works, right? Okay. All right. So thank you, Katrine, very much. Very gracious of you. As erroneous as your introduction was, I'm very happy for it. Thank you. Now, Katrine did allude to a long career. That's true, absolutely. The glamorous aspects, maybe we can talk about that this evening, because those are few and far between in the life of a photographer. So happy to be here tonight, honored to be here tonight, honored that you guys would come out on a Friday late afternoon in New York City and spend some time just talking about pictures. Very honored and very humbled by the fact that you would come here and spend a little time. To that end, I'll try to make this as informative and productive as I possibly can. We're a small enough group. It's a very informal group here, so easy about any manner of questions during my presentation, after the presentation, totally comfortable doing whatever you would like to do or pushing this in a direction that you would feel might be beneficial. As far as I'm concerned, there are no secrets to this industry. Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. The evening just took a really fabulously interesting turn.
Sorry, guys.
How's it going, man?
We're going to go find a seat.
All right, go. How's it going, man? Yeah, right. All right, so the folks from Nikon just showed up. That's Mike Corrado and Mark Subin, both very dear friends from Nikon. I am a Nikon ambassador, happy to be one. I bought my first Nikon camera at Willoughby's 42 years ago. Okay, if anybody even remembers that name. Okay, a Nickermat camera, I bought it in 1973. Okay, so I'm very thankful to the relationship I have with Nikon after all these years. I mean, I grew up on a magazine called Nikon World, if anybody's familiar with it. And back then, there were the heroes of the day in that magazine, you know, the Jay Maisel and Pete Turner and Eric Mayola, Michelle Cherevkov, the color heroes of the day. And so, you know, I thought to myself, God, if I could ever come up with a picture that might merit the attention of a magazine like that, it would be a career well spent. And all these years later, I have this amazing relationship with Nikon cameras, and so I'm very proud of that. And Alex, as already been indicated, is up here, and he's a great resource if anybody has any questions. So relating to questions, I'll throw out right now. Come on in, folks. Yep. Very informal. I'm going to obviously show some pictures tonight, talk about the life and the career of a photographer. I'll move pretty quickly through that entire kind of 40 some odd years. If anybody has any questions during that, as I said, all welcome. Does anybody have any questions to kick off? Anybody have anything at all if we got our heads around it or discussed it tonight, they would feel that tonight would be time well spent? We good? Yes, sir.
What are you doing in post-processing these days? What software are you using?
What am I doing in post-processing these days? As little as possible. As little as possible. I suck at Photoshop, okay? We have a couple of young guys in the studio, our assistants, so I'm not playing dumb here. We do Photoshop on our pictures, but I would describe it as basic darkroom work. You know, it's tweaking, you know, kind of what you would do in the old black and white darkroom, you know. The thing about the way and it may be sort of antediluvian, but, you know, I started as a newspaper wire service photographer here in New York City. I was a copy boy at the New York Daily News in 1976, which is actually sort of embarrassing to admit, but there it is, okay? That was the city in the bad old days. The city was broke. That was the famous New York Daily News that published the headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." New York City was broke, you know. It was not a fun place to be at that time. And then I kind of advanced, you could say that, you know, I could put a gloss on it and say, well, I advanced from newspapers and into magazines, but actually the Daily News fired me. You know, so that's a big impetus to take a different direction, you know what I mean? You know, so I ended up shooting color for magazines. And in that time, you shot a transparency, and it was a done deal, right? Kodachrome. I shot thousands of rolls of Kodachrome for the National Geographic. They would go and get processed by Kodak and get dropped on your editor's desk, and it was done. They saw every frame you shot. So that's the school I kind of come out of. And so I hopefully treat digital the exact same way. As far as organizing, you see a software behind me here. I kind of migrated. I did use Aperture. Aperture is now, you know, deceased. And so now I'm experimenting with Mylio, which is a really fascinating software and a lot of fun to use. Anybody else? Get going here? All right, cool. So let me do this. I've got this kind of old school microphone here. Put it in here. So here we go, folks. Long Strange Trip, that's the category that we're in here. Okay, I just shot this. I try to stay current, right? I just shot this. This is like old school and new school meets up. This is shot with a lens that's probably 20 years old. I bought it used at Adorama Camera. Speaking of Adorama, where's Jeff? The big guy, Jeff Snyder, is here. If anybody, Jeff is my camera consigliere, okay? If I got a question, I go to Jeff. If I need something, I go to Jeff. So he's here, he's in the back of the room. If you want to get with him, he's a font of knowledge. He's a very good photographer in his own right, and so please acknowledge him or get with him if you have any questions. But I bought this lens used at Adorama and bolted it to a D810 and then bolted that to the bottom of a helicopter. Shot this about, I wanted to generate some imagery on the lower part of Manhattan with the addition of the new Trade Center. So, but anyway, a long time ago, the first picture you ever shoot that anybody notices is of a Syracuse University bandsman whose pants fall down during a halftime show. You know you might be in for an interesting, spin of a career. I did go to Syracuse University. I came down to New York City. This was shot at the Hotel Beacon. Anybody know the geography of the city? Do you know the Hotel Beacon, 74th and Broadway? It's a pretty nice place now. It was a flop house back then. It was filled with hookers and pimps and prostitutes and cockroaches, and it was not a good place to live, but there were characters, and this is Ivan Bankoff, who was a vaudevillian, who was there. I shot everything I could when I came to New York City. Weather pictures, okay, cats out on the sidewalk, you know, sunny day, this type of thing that was grist for newspaper feature work back in the day. In New York City, you simply stepped over the dead bodies and got on the subway and went to work. It was not that big a deal, literally, to see a corpse in the city. It was a dangerous place back then. It was a little, a little weird. People didn't go jogging in Central Park back then with the abandon that they do now. Let's put it that way. The subways have always been, I've always hung around on the subways. Dana Carvey in the subways. This is People magazine back in the day, sent me into the subways to come back with a picture that showed why New Yorkers were terrified of the New York City subway system. This is 3 a.m. on the IRT, man. And it was not a good time back then. It was definitely not. And then I went to Ringling Brothers. When Ringling Brothers moves into Madison Square Garden here, they stay for a while, right? So I always was fascinated with circus people, so I went over. And I got this done. This was my first kind of essay that ran in that's too generous a word, but I lied to, well, I didn't lie. I went to Ringling Brothers and I said, I worked at the New York Daily News, which I did. I was not a photographer at the Daily News. I was a copy boy. But all I had to do was tell them I worked at the Daily News, and they were all over me. And so I spent a few weeks with the little clown, early experiments in lighting. This was a flash into an umbrella. I had no idea how much light was coming out, how little. It was basically like a caveman tool of a flash, that I started experimenting with back in that time. So, but I'm a generalist. I'm a committed generalist. There is not too much else to say. I mean, when you say like, oh, Joe, you've really made some interesting choices in your career. You've chosen to be a generalist. And I'm like, yes, I've made that choice. Just conscious decision on my part. No, that's a bunch of bullshit. I'm a generalist because I ain't good at any one type of thing enough to be just that. Right? If you call somebody, I ain't the best fashion guy, I ain't the best sports guy, I ain't the best portrait, I ain't any of that. I'm a Swiss Army knife of photography, which you might see tonight. You throw me at a picture, I'll go get you a picture. Okay? I'm really tenacious about that. I fight on assignment for every scrap, every inch I can get out of my subject matter, and that's been the motif of my career. There's no arc of brilliance to this or anything at all like that. I want to debunk that early on, because if you hang around long enough in this business and you're still upright, people say, he's massively brilliant and talented. It's bullshit, You do what you do. You love this so much you can't stop. You've got no choice. When I teach young photographers, I say, look, photography is not something you do. Being a photographer is something you are, okay? And if you are a photographer, you're screwed, okay? You are screwed right to the wall because you got no choice. You have to go forward. You have to find a way. And that's kind of what I've been doing my whole career, okay? I shoot politics. I've done news stuff. Diana Ross. Who in the room is old? 1983 in Central Park. She got blown off the stage. I had $3,000 worth of damage to my cameras that night because I was massively unprepared for the rainstorm. I hadn't listened to the weather report before I went. So my bad. Okay, this was shot for People magazine back in the day when it was really a magazine. Okay, Carly Simon, okay, celebrity work, okay, Cher, okay, at the Morgan Penthouse with all of her hair. Oh my God. She looked at me and said, you've got 2 minutes. I'm like, Jesus, I'm all right, whatever, Lou Piniella, okay, being not so sweet Lou back in the day at Yankee Stadium. I show this because it's the only good sports picture I've ever shot in my life. If it moves, I generally can't shoot it. I admit that. I had a contract with Sports Illustrated for 8 years. I pulled the wool over their eyes. I was a contract photographer at Sports Illustrated. And I would come in with stuff and they would say, could you please shoot something that happens on the field? I'm like, I'm not interested. I don't care who wins, I'd be like looking at some little kid with a red balloon and nice light, and they'd be scoring the winning touchdown. And eventually it just didn't work out, So they said, look, they still use me every once in a while for a special project or two. Because I'm not interested in sports per se. I'm interested in kind of the obsession behind sports, the drive to excellence and perfection, that type of thing. Joe McNally, anybody remember the Cosmos? okay, back in the day. Anybody remember the little girl who fell down a well? Baby Jessica in Midland, Odessa, Texas, a year after she fell down the well. Sandhogs in New York City, the Irish guys who drive the tunnels underneath New York. I got along well with them, surprisingly. Okay, New York royalty, Connie Chung and Maury Povich in the Dakota. Good God Almighty. Mikhail Gorbachev in the woods, Moscow. You know, this is a hard-fought picture. I shot him in this, as a studio session, and I wasn't happy with it. And I pushed and pushed and pushed to get him to come to the woods. Reason I wanted him in the woods is he's an isolated figure in Russian history. He's all by himself in the course of Russian history. So I got him alone in the woods. He wasn't happy about it. He had fancy shoes. He stood in the snow for me, and then at the end of it, after 4 or 5 minutes, he looked at me and said the only English he shared with me, which was goodbye. You know, and that was it. But I met Gorbachev. And Time Magazine, you know how Time Magazine ran this? I haven't got a laser pointer. If you threw a small square around the hat and the shoulders and the face of Gorbachev, that's how they used it. They used it as a postage stamp on the contents page of Time Magazine. And they didn't pay me, which has sort of been a hallmark of my career. I had just been fired by Life magazine. I'm the last staff photographer in the history of Life magazine, so I accept personal responsibility for the death of photojournalism. But I was fired by Life, and they gave me a massive settlement. I had been a staff photographer for 3 years. They gave me like $3,000 and told me to leave the building. So I bought a ticket to Russia. It suited my mood. I went to Siberia. And I went to Siberia in February because I wanted to go up there and photograph Norilsk, which is the largest nickel mining plant on the face of the planet. So I went up there and I breathed carbon dioxide gas for a week, which was great fun. I can talk about that later. But on my way through Moscow, Time said, look, if you want to pick up Gorbachev, you can use the resources of the Bureau, but we're not going to pay you for it because we don't really think we need the picture. But I wanted to meet Gorbachev. That's what you do as a photographer. You can take a piece of your imagination and make it real by photographing it. You know, and if you're determined enough, no one can stop you. You know, that's the cool thing about it. That's the really cool thing. So I photographed Gorbachev on my way to Siberia. And I did use the resources of the Bureau. There was a guy back then named Boris. He was the driver for Time Inc. in Moscow. And you didn't want to know what Boris used to do, but Boris got me to Gorbachev. Anyway, Tammy Wynette, country singer. Anybody know that song? Stand By Your Man? Embarrassing selfie with a Nikon camera. Okay? Complete with the porn star mustache, everything, okay? All right? Okay, Joe Biden, okay? Back when he was a senator, okay? Reagan getting inaugurated. The return of the hostages. These two pictures were shot in 1 week. Reagan got inaugurated and the hostages came home. Okay, Kennedy as he campaigned. That's Madison Square Garden. I've always had kind of a fondness for getting my camera someplace that nobody else is going to get or very few other people will go. The repainting of the Queensboro Bridge. Okay, the antenna on top of the north tower of the Trade Center shot many years ago, a 16mm fisheye looking straight down on the guys way at the top of that antenna. 105 stories up on the Empire State Building, shot for America 24/7. But, you know, as a photographer, you knock around. You go all over the place, right? When I came to New York and then I migrated out of newspapers, I started shooting for magazines and the Geographic and Life and places like that. It became kind of a ticket to the rest of the world. I always tell young photographers, don't think of it as a camera system. Think of it as a visa. Think of it as an entree into worlds and lives apart from yours. And that's a really, really cool thing because by virtue of having this camera in your hands, you are allowed into people's lives. And that's, you know, that's an amazing event. It satisfies your curiosity, it increases your knowledge, it increases your sympathy for the human condition. All those things ramp up, okay? You do some not smart things when you're a photographer, like ride around on the front of a Somali technical. These guys are totally high on khat, you know? The horror of landmines, Afghanistan, okay? Northeast corner of Rwanda after the genocide. This is the church at Enterama, where these people were slain hand to hand. That's some 600 skulls on the table. That Chechnya, when these kids had their house bombed out by a Russian helicopter gunship. In Afghanistan, again, when the Taliban solidified its hold, I got inside of an Afghani house, again in Goma in Rwanda. The Vomit Comet in Russia. Okay, I spent 3 weeks in Star City doing battle with the Russians because the Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts were training together, and they kept screwing me. You know, this was the biggest bribe I ever paid anybody to get on board this plane. It was an ice storm, and this kind of squatty Russian fella who used to be in the KGB looked at me, and I gave him $10,000 in cash. And I never had $10,000 in cash in my hand before. I gave it to him, and he stuffed it into his pocket, and he signaled to the pilot, and they broke the plane out of the ice and flew the whole mission on instruments. The American astronauts were freaked out. At the end of it, they looked at me and said, "Joe, we would have scrubbed this mission back home." Then the pilots never saw the ground. And you know what this is? It's a parabola mission. You fly steep parabolas like this, and at the top of the parabola, you go weightless for about 40 seconds. And there's no windows on the plane, and people are standing on the ceiling, so your stomach loses its gyros immediately. Okay, and you start, if you're not used to this, you start throwing up like a banshee. And I started throwing up so badly I couldn't even see through my camera anymore. I had to keep cleaning out the eyepiece, you know, and just like vomit all over the camera. It was awful. Yeah, you know. Is that too much information? Actually, when I shot this, Mike Lopez Alegria, American astronaut, is bungee corded to the floor, and he's holding my legs, stabilizing me as I popped to the ceiling. And then I took the Russian and American flags and I threw them into weightlessness, and they started playing with them, which was kind of cool. The guy up top in the blue outfit, he is a space cowboy. That's Sergei Krikalev, who has spent more time in space than any other human being. He was on board Mir. This is the Russians for you. He was on board Mir when Yeltsin stood on the tank, and they had a radio up to Mir and said, "We got a few problems down there. You're going to have to hang in there." And he was scheduled to come down. He'd already been there for 6 months. He spent another 6 months in space. It's nuts. These people, this kind of a program is just crazy. But anyway, Richie Kane, Truck 4, good photographer, Richie, you know, shot with speed lights. You know, that's the portable light. I use it all the time. You know, there's a speed light underneath him, there's a speed light in the cab, and there's a red gelled speed light hanging off his rearview mirror, which he didn't complain about because he never uses his rearview mirror. He just doesn't care. You know, Vietnam, okay, India, lifestyle stuff, you know, surgery in Vietnam, street performance. My first assignment for the Geographic, which was a disaster. Geographic hated it. The editor at the magazine, they sent me down to Copper Canyon in Mexico. And they hated it because I came back and it didn't look like the Grand Canyon. The editor said I'm like, this is not my fault, dude. You know, I mean, the Grand Canyon doesn't look like I'm supposed to fix that? I mean, but that's the mentality you run into at the Geographic. Okay? American opera stars in a pachinko parlor in Japan. Okay, A Day in the Life of Ireland. Cheese wheels in Italy. Parma, Italy. Lots of Parmesan. Okay, acupuncture. Story on global markets for the National Geographic out in the streets of New Delhi. Leonard Bernstein on the occasion of his 70th birthday. Lenny was a volcano of a man. I really enjoyed working with him. He was just he was out there. He was difficult, but he was also brilliant, and I really respected that and admired it. You know, so when you light something like this, you try to make your light disappear. I wasn't completely successful. You can kind of tell how I lit this. There's my umbrella right there. You know, I could retouch it out, but I don't. I sort of like it. It's a flaw. You know, all my pictures are flawed on some level. Linus Pauling, 2-time Nobelist. Okay, B.F. Skinner, oh, really weird dude. Okay, really out there. Terry Tempest Williams, a naturalist writer. She writes about the Great Salt Lake, so I put her in the Great Salt Lake. You know, I mean, this isn't like a stroke of brilliance, right? You know, like she writes about the Great Salt Lake. I'm going to put you in the Great Salt Lake. You know, Pat Patterson, the first and original Marlboro Man. Not surprisingly, he's no longer with us. Okay, Placido Domingo as he becomes Othello. Dr. Andrew Weil. So how do you make somebody? Dr. Andrew Weil is the natural medicine doctor. So how do you make that connection as a photographer? You know, so I persuaded him to cover himself in mud. He didn't want to do it, but I appealed to his ego. which was enormous. And he kind of like hedged his bet, but he wanted this to happen. I told him, and again, I did not lie to him. I told him, this could be on the cover of Life magazine. And it could have been. It was not, ultimately. James Brown, Augusta, Georgia's most famous son. I was down there shooting the Masters for Golf Digest, and I kept calling James Brown manager, and it took about 9 days. And finally they called me back and said, James will come and meet you. And I had, I shot 17 frames with him, 17 frames. He walked in and we were basically done. We were basically done before it even started. But it was very cool. I met the Godfather of Soul. What an amazing event. Like, never thought that could happen. Travis Tritt, rock star. Tony Bennett, very classy, wonderful man on the subway out to Astoria, Queens. I mean, if you're a stature of Tony Bennett, you get on the subway, you're dealing with a decent human being. He said, yeah, we'll go in the subway together, have a cup of coffee in a little coffee shop in Queens, decent guy. This is the first time he's in his apartment as it gets finished on Central Park South. One of the things I regret, you get reticent about things. He made that sketch impromptu. Tony's a hell of an artist. And he made that sketch impromptu. And he basically made it for me because I was photographing him, so he occupied his time by sketching. And I just didn't have the guts to ask him for it. I just would have loved to have had it, but I never asked him for it. Michelle Pfeiffer at the National Gem Collection in the United States. You see this? Right? So why don't I get rid of that? I like it. What happened here was I had to light Michelle Pfeiffer. She was very particular about her lighting. So I had to light her beautifully. If you light a gem beautifully, the gem looks like shit, okay? Because diamonds are cut on a bias for brilliance. So you got to pump a lot of light into a gem, hard light, to get it to glow. So I used a projector spot kind of flash arrangement, 3,000 watt seconds, and then I cut masks to the shape of each gem that I was working with. And so there's an assistant on the light tracking the motions of her chest. Everywhere she went, that model lamp followed that gem. And so there's an extra 3,000 watt seconds getting pumped into the gem. There's so much light getting pumped into the gem, it refracted out of the gem onto the statues next to her. So I could get rid of it, but I like it. It happened. It was there. So, if I lit her as hard as I lit that gem, she would have walked off the set. I couldn't have that. That's her wearing $500 million worth of gems. That's the Hope Diamond that she's holding. More recently, Julian Bond, one of my true heroes of American history. He was very active in the 60s for voting rights and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Okay? Steve Martin, Double Exposure, right? Tragicomic Masks. Yeah, I admit it, I shot this. All right? You have some true low moments as a photographer, You have some moments where it's so desperate that you just, oh God. Anyway, yeah, anybody remember the Queen of Mean? Leona Helmsley, that's her beloved Harry on the wall. She was completely batshit crazy. I came up to move her gently, respectfully. I had my fingers on her shoulders type of thing, and I wanted to turn her. And she looks at me as I'm turning her, and she goes, "You just want to see my knockers." Now, what do you say to that? It was like, yeah, no, Mrs. Helmsley, no, not really. I'm sure they're lovely, but I have no absolute, I just want to leave, actually, because you're like really scary. And there's her when she got into trouble with Dershowitz, her lawyer, who was also his own equivalent kind of thing. And this is like a bad photograph, but it summed up my day up there. It's out of focus and all that. Harry is completely 3 sheets to the wind. He has no idea where he is. And she's cranking his head around for the camera, like, "Here's my lovely Harry." And Dershowitz is on the phone, and I'm there, and I'm just praying that the elevator from their penthouse goes back to the planet Earth. I'm like, I need to get out of here, okay? Because these people are really, really scary. Rodney Dangerfield is a sweetheart. Kim Fook, the Napalm Girl. Anybody remember the famous picture of Nick Utt? This is her 20 years after that with her baby, Thomas. No caption necessary. Okay? A sad story, a heartwarming but sad story, the death of Jim Henson. My first cover of Life magazine. Okay? Now, Light, what are you going to do? We were crashing this cover. Very sad story, closing immediately. The Henson folks really wanted a legacy of Jim in Life magazine. So this is Bert and Ernie at Jim's old office. Now, this looks like a shot at noon, right? It's shot at 3 a.m. Okay, we worked overnight because we had to get film. We kept the lab open. So I went to the roof of the Henson Mansion in the East 60s, and I took up 2400 watt-second units, and I banged a ton of flash through that window so it looks like daylight. And we closed the story the next day. Okay, and that's my first cover of Life. I gave it to my daughter Caitlin, who was in kindergarten at the time, and it was cool because she brought it into kindergarten. She said, look, my daddy shot this picture. My daddy knows Kermit, which was kind of sweet. Okay, that's my other daughter, Claire. If you're a staff photographer at Life magazine, you get to put your kids on the cover. Okay, I'd never told her that this was the worst selling cover of the year at that time, but she really came through for me. She was only 4. Okay. My whole career has been about downsizing. This is the very first issue of the downsized Life magazine. So it became sort of historic in a negative way. Most complicated picture. I've lived a lot of lifetimes as a photographer. If you can believe this, in this advanced digital era that we're in now, Life magazine came to me and said, we want you to make an incredibly complicated picture without the use of the computer. So we can show people that we use real film. We do real pictures and not that nasty digital stuff. Can you believe it? I mean, that was like a lifetime ago, right? So this is 2 pieces of 8x10 film. Vanessa Williams and all 13 of her changes, A Kiss of the Spider Woman when she was on Broadway. So the 2 pieces of film are butted together in the middle. And I was using a millimetric gate on a Sinar 8x10, and I just kept shifting that gate across, to create slivers of available exposure. And then she'd hit her mark, and I'd hit some flashes. And we had everything, sort of logged and numbered and wired, because we shot it in 5 hours and had her back on Broadway that night. I couldn't believe she went through this and actually went back on stage that night. It's crazy. But she's a complete pro. I've worked with her a number of times. She's a total sweetheart of a human being and a complete professional. Just awesome. Okay, I've done Olympiads. I'm not very good at it, but I've been assigned to a couple of Olympiads over the course of time. I'm much better at this. Okay, I'm much better at this kind of thing. I show this now to young photographers that are like, it's really not very good Photoshop. And I'm like, yeah, that's because it's shot on film in one exposure. I used a front projection screen, the biggest one in Hollywood. You've been around for a while. Like this guy, Reggie Miller, this is when he was at UCLA. He went into like a 25-year career in the NBA, and he's retired. And I'm still shooting pictures, which indicates that I haven't really advanced very much at all, But I borrowed these slides from NASA, and we bounced them off a trampoline. Right? And it's a front projection system, 3,000 watt-seconds through a half-silvered mirror. So you pump that light right at that front projection and screen, and it's beaded, so it's fully reflective at 90 degrees. If you're slightly off, you don't get squat out of the screen. If you're beam on, you get a powerful comeback out of it. So I was able to shoot this on one piece of film. Bing, done. Now he's 6'11", so this is back in the day. I've got a handheld flash meter taped to a monopod, and I'm bouncing myself off the trampoline, and I'm holding the monopod up like this, trying to get my zones of exposure. So, and no digital confirmation, no screen or anything that's telling me that things are working. Okay, I'm decent at doing this, which is stupid. I turned the University of Texas 10-meter platform into a stroboscopic dive studio. This cost Sports Illustrated $40,000. One shot. Took me 5 days. You know how much they paid me? $500 a day. See, I have history with Sports Illustrated. When they took my contract away in 1988, they called me. Here's the risk you take as a photographer. Forgive me an aside. They called me in 1988, and they said, today's your lucky day. Now, when a picture editor tells me it's my lucky day, I get a chill that goes right up my spine. And they say, we're going to send you to the Seoul Olympics, and you're going to get a Go Everywhere credential, and you only owe us 1 photograph a day, and it can be any photograph you want. Dream assignment, right? I said, no. I turned it down because I was committed to Bill Luster, who was at the Louisville Courier-Journal, who had organized a thing called the NPPA Flying Short Course, which was a freebie lecture tour. So I gave up like 5 weeks of day rates to go do a free lecture tour. Why? Because on the faculty of that lecture tour was Tom Kennedy, who was the DOP of the National Geographic at the time, and I took a big risk. I threw my relationship into sport. They didn't hire me again until 2000, 12 years later, you know? And I thought if I could become part of that lecture tour as a faculty member and I could relate to Tom as an equal, that maybe I could change the direction of my career, because I knew sports wasn't going to be it. And sure enough, at the end of that NPPA tour in 1988, he said, you should come down to Geographic and start shooting for us. And I've shot for the Geographic for 25 years. But Sports Illustrated was pretty pissed, okay? And they didn't hire me again until the year 2000 when I did this. And I said to them, okay, well, it's 12 years later. Thank you for hiring me again. What's the day rate? Because back in 1988, I was making $500 a day. And he goes, well, it's $500 a day. You have to laugh or you just start to cry, you know. Same thing, highly technically evolved thing with the multiple exposure shot in the airport hangar of Lubbock, Texas, the entire United States trampolining team in the air at once. Okay? If you want wings on a basketball player, I am your guy. Okay? Call me, I can put wings on anybody. Okay? This guy had big wingspan, so yeah, there you go. You know? I have a pretty good sense of humor. This is Mike Richter, the goalie for the United States Olympic team. I put him on the ice at Wallman Rink with the Rockettes. That was fun. The Fighting Lopez's. What? You know the family? Sweetheart of a family. You know Steve Lopez? He's won the gold medal 3 times in Taekwondo. This fella back in here. The first family of Taekwondo. So I staged this thing, the long-suffering Mrs. Lopez, the family dog Ninja, and I staged the fighting brood in the kitchen, you know. And how do you make a big guy look bigger? Give him a small basketball, you know. Okay, Shawn Johnson, the little gymnast, she's from Iowa. Put the balance beam in the cornfield. This isn't rocket science, okay? Bird Fidrets, anybody remember Bird? Wonderful guy, okay? Used to talk to the baseball. So I put him in a field in nice light, and I dumped some baby chicks on him, okay? Oral Hershiser, what's his nickname? Bulldog, okay? That's the Bulldog from the Jake and the Fat Man TV series. The fucking Bulldog made more money than I did. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it just bubbled out of me. The Bulldog made like $1,000 on this because he's a Hollywood Bulldog. You know why he's going crazy? Hershiser's far cheek is slathered in bacon grease. So the Bulldog's just going nuts. Okay, Bo Jackson, as he approached winning the Heisman Trophy. Fantastic. The most amazing athlete I've ever been close to. James Blake, tennis star. This was a bad idea. Okay, this is Nate Newton. It's 330 pounds going off a diving board. I talked him into it. He said, all right, but the problem is I'm in the pool. And I totally didn't think it through, you know. I'm in one of those little Walmart rafts, you know. I got my cameras and stuff, and radios and wires and everything. I'm like, okay, here we go, you know. And he hit the water, and I just went ass over tea kettle. I lost the camera, everything. I just didn't think it through, which is what you do as a photographer because you're so bloody passionate about getting this picture. You honestly, at a certain point, just don't care anymore, you know, about what could happen. Okay, the back cover of the book, Baseball in America. Okay, the best story I ever shot for Sports Illustrated, Indiana high school basketball. Okay, City Game, right? Bruce Dalrymple, grew up in Harlem, 125th Street subway station, one flash. Okay, the Mets, back when they used to be halfway decent. This is always referred to it as a portrait of arrogance. Okay, and the United States water polo team with their balls. I took the clothes off the Olympic team back in '96. It was scandalous back then. Now it's just kind of athletes are getting naked all over the place. You know, they already got their clothes off when they walk into the studio. Gail Devers, the fastest woman in the world. Jackie Joyner-Kersee. Carl Lewis. Actually, Carl's had a bad rap in the press. I always got along well with Carl. He was a decent guy, and I always got along well. Those are all his gold medals except the one that he buried with his dad. Okay, National Geographic cover on globalization of culture. George Lucas. George, he makes like these movies that everybody loves, but George as a person is really kind of boring. He just, for a picture, he just stands there. That's all he does. He stands there. So Michelle Yeoh, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I needed a stunt actress in front of a Hollywood association. That's how we shot it. Okay, special helicopter base, cost Geographic about 20 grand. I'm slung below the helicopter. She's up there with me. My colleagues at the Geographic were kind of pissed off at me about doing this because it got a lot of attention. And so they called me up and basically, they didn't congratulate me on the photograph. They just told me I had to lose some weight. Geographic's not a nice place sometimes. It's very competitive, a lot of type A personalities. If your story does better and gets more pages, it means somebody else's story gets less pages. And they're pissed. It's a very intensely competitive place. Okay? Perfect story, perfect picture for this story. It's a bunch of Chinese guys pretending to be Egyptians in an Italian opera. So it worked out well for that particular story. For a while there, I was working my way through the body parts. This is called The Sense of Sight. Won a National Magazine Award, 42 pages on a cover. Okay, single flash. Anybody here use speed lights? Right? Anybody here ever been frustrated with speed lights, like TTL speed lights? Yeah. Yeah, if you're frustrated about speedlight technology as it stands now, try this. This is the Nikon SB24, okay? Way back. So I've stuck with this stuff for a long time, and I've seen it become this gift to us, technology speaking, that you can work light and fast with these small lights. So this is one speed light, and it became the cover of this is a 30-second exposure with a Nikon SB24 and a close-up lens. Okay, little Anna Canning looking for berries in a field. This closed the story. This little girl is looking out a window in a Chinese hospital with her repaired eyes for the first time, seeing normally. Blindness in Tanzania. And as I say, the Geographic, the editors, they're a very august group, right? They're very serious. They like to be taken seriously. And so here's the way they think. I did really well on the Sight story, all sorts of notice and stuff like that. And so I swear to God, this is what they do. Well, he did well with the eye. Let's give him the brain, So I got another body part, And so this is like a quickie picture that ended up as the cover. The brain, right? That's the living human brain on the table at Johns Hopkins. Phil Flash, right? I'm in close to the living human brain. I'm literally like this far from the brain. I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't breathe. This little girl's life was on the table. But here's the thing. Jody Miller, she was 3 years old. She had this radical procedure where she lost that entire hemisphere of her brain. You can look at me. You don't have to look at the screen, ma'am. It's okay. Stay with me, all right? Eyes, okay? All right? And I'm still in touch with her. She's married. She's on Facebook. We're friends on Facebook. And the family and I still exchange Christmas cards. This is an emotional thing. I came out of that OR, and from my knees on down, my surgical scrubs were soaked in this little kid's blood, right? Just soaked, because cranial wounds just bleed like crazy. She was entirely transfused during this operation. And it was just an amazing moment. This family let me into their lives when their little kid could have easily died. How could, and that's not a gift you can ever repay anyone. So one of the things that you do as a photographer is you remain emotionally constant. You take care of them, you take care of their pictures in the aftermath, and you just stick with it. You stick with it. But how do you don't see the brain, but you see what happens when the brain goes wrong, right? This elderly couple trying to teach their son how to brush his teeth again, things like that. I had to live with Hobo Ron for 3 days, the mentally ill homeless, that whole question, right? Okay, the human body. I've always been interested in the human body, so Geographic gave me a story on that. The Ironman triathlon, the beginning of the marathon out at the Verrazano. 600 millimeter lens from a helicopter. I was the first photojournalist allowed to go through Hell Week with the U.S. Navy SEALs. Okay, you have to own your archive because that picture later became a cover of Newsweek. And guess what? Newsweek's gone, right? Newsweek's gone. But who's still around? The pesky little freelancer. Right? You just can't kill us. The magazines come and go, and they lord it over you, and they squash you, and they treat you badly, and all that shit. And guess what? Who still survives? Because we just love this so much, right? We just won't go away. Wilma, at the National Geographic, they spend $80,000 recreating the perfect Neanderthal woman. You know, which sounds really weird. You know, whoa, babe. You know, I really love the way you brandish that spear. They told me she's buck naked and she's anatomically correct. So they told me, be careful of the nudity, you know. So I sent this in. They weren't happy with it. Okay. After that, they got pissed. You know how pissed National Geographic is with you when they send you out to shoot telescopes, because telescopes is the sixth circle of hell. Anybody ever shoot a telescope, a major telescope? Holy shit. I mean, you live on a lonely, dark mountaintop with a bunch of astronomers who are not fun people, okay? They don't get out much. They spend all night up, you know, looking at stars and not talking to anyone. It's like, it's desperate, you know. This is at the Atacama Desert. You know what this is called? The Very Large Telescope. That's really the name. They're working on a new telescope down there called the VVLT. It's called the Very, Very Large Telescope. Look it up. Look it up. I swear to God. This is not, you asked about retouching. This is 2 exposures on film, okay? Done, you know. You can see it's not perfect, but I kind of like the fact that it's not perfect. Again, the Atacama Desert down, you know. And it got so bad, my editor got so mad at me that he stopped talking to me, so he started sending me these sketches. This is like the game plan. Go take pictures of this stuff. And they asked me for a coverage plan, so I figured I'd fight fire with fire. So I sent him back this. They like people who take themselves seriously. I don't take myself seriously. So I've always been in the doghouse with the Geographic. And I ended up on a 175-foot boom crane on top of an 11,500-foot mountain. That's 35,000 watt-seconds of flash inside a 22-story building. Okay? You better come back with it at that point. Okay? This, on the other hand, is 4 speedlights, you know, and this visualization device. First all-digital story in the history of the National Geographic. Shot it on a Nikon D1X. Nikon had, let's see, we had 1 gig cards back in that camera that held 119 nefs. I thought I was like fancy. You know what those 1 gig cards cost? About $700, $800, something like that. You know, now we got like 395,000 gig cards or whatever it is. You know, this picture of total accident ran as it was the last picture I shot. Last day in the field, shot the lead. What are you going to do? That's me. I just made a happy snap for my grandkids, and Geographic used it. It's a selfie in an F-16. Geographic did not use this picture. It's a cool picture. They didn't use it. It's all right. I'm not angry or bitter. Flying back seat, Blue Angels, slot number 4. Okay, John Glenn, very decent man. Spent 17 weeks with Senator Glenn as he prepared to go back to space, which was kind of cool. Very cool, actually. And that is very cool. I don't know. It's not much of a picture, I know. But it's a very cool moment for me, because that's Ralph Morse. Anybody know the name Ralph Morse? The Dean of American Space Photography. He's dead now. He was an original life staffer. He did all the Merc 7 stuff of the original astronauts, and he's one of my heroes. And Ralph was down there recreating his cover for Life. And I revere the man, you know, and I've always been very reverential about those who have gone before, because they created an archive that is the shoulders upon which we stand. Geographic's still trying to kill me, and they assigned me to do the 21st century grid. This is Lehman Brothers building down in lower Manhattan. Digital technology. I shot this with a D3S and a 200 to 400 millimeter lens at night from a helicopter. Try this with film, okay? Forget about it, right? Amazing quality, right? That's me up where I shouldn't be, up on the power lines, out of a Cessna. This is how I went to work for a week, okay? I'm too old to be doing this, but, you know, I can't stop. That's where the pictures are, so I went up on the power lines with all the linemen, okay? Spent a lot of time on the outside of helicopters. It's a lot of fun. Story on light, harder than you would have imagined, okay? Diwali, the Festival of Lights in India, okay? The top of the Luxor Pyramid in Vegas. And then, this is the only good place that Geographic ever sent me. They sent me on spring break to go see, you know, sun worshipers and people getting tan and stuff like that. I'm in Cancun. So I came up with this. My editor was like, I don't think this is proper. And so they sent me to Siberia, where there is no light, and there is no fun, and there is no sun. Okay? And then Empire State Building, I've climbed it a whole bunch, that antenna up there. This was for, I figured it would be kind of cool to do like the ultimate light bulb changing shot. And a little selfie up there, kind of fun. Just shot this out of the bottom of the chopper. And then I do climb things. This is the top of the Burj Khalifa Tower in Dubai, currently the tallest building in the world. And this picture took off on social media and went completely viral. And I didn't get anything out of it except a new pair of shoes. The Echo Shoe Company contacted me on Facebook, and evidently they were embarrassed for me at the condition of my boots. So they said, what size are you, dude? And I said, size 11, and that was the only money, or only remuneration I got out of the whole thing. They sent me a new pair of size 11s, which was cool, because I negotiated with the building for 3 years. I told you, I'm tenacious. Nobody paid me. Nobody told me to climb that building. I negotiated with them for 3 years, and I finally got to the top of it. And I still have a relationship with them, which is kind of cool, okay? The best thing about it, I left a love note for my wife at the top of the tallest building on earth, you know, which is kind of cool, but it did lead to something. Everything knocks into each other as a career as a photographer. Epson staged this campaign, like, write in and tell us what your ideas are, and Joe will go shoot it. And so people wrote in and said, have him go climb something. So here I am, top of the antenna on top of the Prudential Center, and I got paid a lot of money to go do this. So things kind of work out, you know, if you're tenacious. This is recently from the helicopter shoot over Manhattan. I've always kind of been involved in, you know, going someplace up high. The trade centers were part of my archive, obviously a story on greengrocers, and then, you know, of course, they were gone. So after 9/11, this was my only assignment I got. After 9/11. 4 days after 9/11, I shot Mike Piazza, the New York Mets, with the plume in the background. And I thought, I cannot do this. I cannot have this pass without being involved somehow. And I went to Time Warner, and I asked them for $100,000. And I moved into the world's only giant Polaroid camera. Have you ever heard about it? No longer exists. I had had one experience with it. It's a life-size camera. It is not the 20 by 24. It's the size of a one-car garage, and it makes an image that's 40 inches by 80 inches 90 seconds after you make the exposure. And there's two people physically inside. You can't focus the camera. At f/45, you have a ½ an inch of depth of field. When I did this project in the aftermath of 9/11, that's what resulted. That's January 2002 at Grand Central Station. The frames are 4 feet by 9 feet. It became a book, and it helped raise $2 million. Which was then donated to the relief of downtown public education. So it traveled. That's John Baldessari, who's the first firefighter. He's with Engine 33, Ladder 9 Engine 33 on Great Jones Street. And that's 10 years later, he's a lieutenant. So I got sent back to do a 10-year retrospective. And these folks let me back into their lives because I've always been respectful. They were the first firehouse to come to the camera, and so every 9/11 morning, without fail, I am at that firehouse to pay my respects. So there's a sense of constancy about being a photographer. Jason Cascone, I'm still in touch with Jason, probationary firefighter. He was given last rites and thrown on a bus, sent to the pit. Youngest lieutenant in the history of FDNY. He's now a captain, youngest captain in the history of FDNY. Mike and Billy, that's Mike 10 years later with a cross commemorating the loss of his cousin. Mike Wernick, very close to Mike. He came back to his life through the love of his wife. They're an astonishing couple, and they're very close friends. Louis was the cover of the book 10 years later on the Brooklyn Bridge. Danny Foley posed for this picture 3 days after he found his brother Tommy's body. And since then, he's stepped up and taken Tommy's place at Rescue 3 in the Bronx, and that's Tommy in his helmet. Every fire he goes into, he puts his mask card in there and goes into the fire. Photography's personal. This young lady, I met her, all these relationships are personal. I met her in the Philippines. She was having a tough time in her life. Very bad place. You can see the scars maybe right here. And then all of a sudden I noticed, distressingly, that she had taken one of my pictures and covered her scars with it, tattooed it on her body. Picture of a jagged mirror. She was cutting herself with a mirror. And I have 2 daughters, and one of whom has struggled all her life with self-esteem issues. Now that young lady, the photography threw her a lifeline. And so immediately my heart went out to her, and I can't, oftentimes I can't find the words, but I can find a photograph. And so this is one of my most important pictures. This is my oldest daughter trying to walk, my youngest at the Jersey Shore. That's my first vacation as a divorced father, okay? She wanted to go straight up in the pool. Instead, she went off to the side and smashed her face into the wall of the pool. So I couldn't actually talk about this, so I made a picture and I sent it to her mother, which did not go well. That's the last time I saw my mom. Okay, I knew I would never see her again, so I made a photograph. It's the way you express yourself. My professor in school, he allowed me to be a photographer. And folks here at SVA, there is no measuring the value of a good teacher. No measuring. I would not be a photographer without this man, Fred Demarest. Okay, Danny Farrell, my mentor at the New York Daily News. David Allen Harvey. These are photographers who all had positive impact on me. Jay Maisel. Nixon, many years ago. The gentleman on the right is David Douglas Duncan. Does anybody know that name? He was buddies with Nixon in World War II. And all those years later, I got sent to photograph Duncan in the south of France. At the age of 96, he's still photographing. I do weddings, okay? I knock out weddings here and there for friends, okay? Former assistant, I'll shoot it for free. Okay, my friends Gene and Olivia going down New York City, getting married. Okay, in Vietnam, I love to shoot weddings, actually, especially when I'm not the wedding photographer. Okay, I keep the stitching, emotional stitching to my life together by shooting dance. I always tell young photographers, find something that you think is so beautiful you can't help but shoot it. So I've had a long career photographing dance, and I've worked with some of the major companies. I've shot advertising campaigns for them from what just started as a hobby. Okay, this is in Russia. Life magazine did not want me to do the story over in Russia. They did not want me to do the story. So they said, you can only go if you don't spend any money. So this is the glamorous life that Katrine alluded to earlier. This is where I stayed. This is my fixer's tenement. Life magazine belongs to Time Warner, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. And this is where I'm staying, just because I want to shoot this stuff. Okay? Dancer in the Philippines. The jeepney is an important part of Filipino culture. Vancouver Ballet. Modern dancer. Paloma Herrera, she's about to retire this year. That's her feet. Okay? All right. I'm a big hands person. Hands are always on my list to photograph because they can be very storytelling. This is Ronnie Coleman, 8-time Mr. Olympia. The hands of a carpenter. Arnold Palmer's hands. Hands of a Cuban boxer. I try to stay current. I'm still out there pitching. This was a cover of Sports Illustrated when Boston won the World Series. Big Papi Ortiz, the hero. Just shot this. This is the cover of the first book to be released by Derek Jeter Publishing. It's a story of a blind sports writer. I had an amazing day with this man. His whole life spun on a baseball. He was blinded by a baseball, but he trained himself to cover the sport by listening for the ball. And then I do production work, I convinced Disney to turn around 180 degrees the Indiana Jones stunt spectacular. Cost them $50,000 one night. They didn't have any guarantee the picture was going to run. Thank God it did run. The world's largest gathering of jazz musicians. Okay? I lit this whole pool. I mean, you have to be tenacious about this stuff. This is 40 feet deep, and it's 100 by 200. It's at NASA. And they finally allowed me, after I did the dive test, to get into that pool and shoot it. But I also work locally. I stay involved. That was a project for North Shore Long Island Jewish Hospitals, an ad for Epson. I am a committed generalist, as I said earlier, through no choice. If you've got a job, I'll go shoot it for you. I've shot the FedEx campaign for years. It was a lot of fun. Shooting trucks. I don't care. I like time behind the camera. I like the sound of the shutter. I shoot for Nikon. I consider myself blessed to shoot for Nikon. This is the D3 campaign. Little Joe Lasseter down at Preservation Hall. Colors, light. People love this picture. People love bulldogs. Okay, all right? Down on the Mississippi, a legendary bluesman, Little Freddie King. You think these campaigns for cameras are attended with lots of pomp and circumstance. They aren't. This is the Nikon DF. I shot the marketing campaign in one day. This was the morning. This was the afternoon. That was it. Prototype camera. Gave it back. Okay? Shot this as an ad on the Schuylkill River last summer. I have a crazy client in Beijing. I shoot fashion. I'm not a fashion photographer, but put somebody pretty in front of my lens, I'll shoot the picture. That we had Temple of Heaven to ourselves. Think about that. That's really cool. It gets overrun with people. So the guy who arranged it was the manager. He gave me his business card. It said manager, Temple of Heaven. I'm like, dude, that's a really cool business card. You know? Great wall. Okay? I just shot this for PPE last year. It happened on Halloween weekend. This is my twisted imagination at work. All right? I imagined 2 trick-or-treaters going off into an enchanted forest, and they never came back. So they met a kind of this weird tree. I imagined this little girl reading a scary story, and the mural in her bedroom came alive. So this stuff is all done in camera. There's no Photoshop going on here. There's no compositing, right? The little touching up, tweaking, contrast, that's it. But basically it comes out of the camera. It's about camera work and light and imagination and the intersection thereof, okay? Just shot this for Life, still shooting for Life. They do books now, a story on Vietnam vets down at the Vietnam Wall. I chip away at things. Yeah, you heard me say it took me 3 years to get to the top of the Burj Khalifa. I'm going to get something out of Cirque du Soleil. I've been working with their athletes now for about 3 years, and I keep chipping away at trying to establish a relationship. So that fella lifting that tire is the lead in the Ka show down in Vegas. So I keep working with their athletes. A Cuban farmer. I just shot this, my imagination. I imagined a golfer hit his ball into a water hazard and had to go blast it out with the help of mermaids. So this is the Weeki Wachee Mermaid Springs. This is all lit, okay? This is shot real time, okay? I've been doing this series of portraits called Garage Guys. I'm fascinated with these guys. They welcome your problems with enthusiasm. I just shot this as an ad for Gitzo tripods. I had this idea for 3 years, and finally they said, all right, here's a little bit of money. You can go shoot this. So I took it out into the desert. I put a gymnast on it. Okay? How do your cameras get this way? I shot this about 2 weeks ago. This is the side of the Burj Khalifa tower I went over with the window washers. It was fun, you know? It was fun. I had to get trained on ropes and all that other stuff, you know? But it was a hoot, right? And again, you know, nobody really paid me to do it, you know? But I'm after it. I go after it all the time. And the guys, they're a hoot. Thanks very much for coming tonight. $5.10. Am I good or what?
You're a professional. Wow. Absolutely. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sure Joe will be happy to answer a few.
Sir. No, I'm not a starving artist. I do some stuff. There's food for the table and food for the soul. And blessedly, over the course of time, there's been enough food for the table. But uncertainty, as a friend of mine said once, if you're going to be a freelance photography, you have to make uncertainty your friend, right? I'm very comfortable not knowing what I'm going to do next. I'm very comfortable not knowing where the next paycheck is necessarily going to come from. Blessedly, I have some relationships in this industry that have seen me through. And actually, I got a couple of them up there with the Nikon folks. You know, they always seem to come up with a camera, a lens, or a job right about when you need it, you know? So I've been very blessed in that regard. It was fun. You know, I mean, you do have a moment because you're in these ropes and you have to climb up on a 5-foot ledge, and then you have to lean backwards and start walking down the side of the building, you know. So that has its moments. You know, I won't go into the details of what occurs, but, you know, you have to kind of suck it up and go forward, right? What? Go backwards. Yeah, you go backwards, which is fine, because then you're not looking down. But actually, I enjoy looking down. I'm looking down, and, you know, and at that point, your assignment instincts kick in, and you're more worried about the pictures than you are about anything else, really. So you kind of let it go, you know, and my unbelievably blessed and patient wife kind of puts up with that, which she has to, kind of, because my Christmas present to her last year was to get trained as a high-performance driver. So she went to the racetrack and started driving fast. So I think it's fair enough. All sorts of light, a lot of speed lights, because those were the lights I brought. And then on a couple of occasions I needed a big flash, and I had to go to this place called, anybody been to Beijing? They go, Wukesong is where these knockoff shops are, tons and tons of camera stores. And I went in there and I just trolled through the place buying little bits and pieces of junk here and there, a knockoff beauty dish, you know, an old battery pack, whatever it might have been, just to supplement what I had for speed lights. No, good question. Thankfully, no. I've never lost a job. I use Lexar cards. I found them to be very dependable. Okay. I've had a card go bad on me here and there, but thankfully I've had the warning go off, the ERR kind of warning before I actually shoot on it. So I can say, you know, I have not lost a job due to card corruption. I have damaged a lot of cameras. Corrado. I've damaged a lot of cameras. Yeah. They've been all manner of stuff. Run into trees, off the edge of airplanes, run over by a pickup truck. I lost a prototype camera in Miami Bay. I lost 5 motor-driven Nikons in one shot on the 3rd launch of the space shuttle. Thankfully, they weren't mine. You know, but you batter the gear. You do. You batter yourself and the gear. You know, hopefully everything survives in the end, but occasionally it is physically daunting what you're required to do. Oh, wow, all-time favorite lens. Good question. Probably a 28-1.4. Really love a fast 28, you know. And also a 20, because I see kind of wide. And I just bought a 20 f1.8, which is a really cool lens. And I'm kind of back in the zone on that. Back in the day, if I went out with 2 cameras and 2 lenses, it would be a 20 2.8 and a 180 2.8. So now if I go out with a 20 and a 70-200, I figure I'm good to go. No, I used to be fluent. Well, a French person would not regard me as fluent, but I could get by in French. But that was years ago, and I've lost it over time, which is sad. Well, the first thing you have to do, obviously, is your research. And then also you have to find some measure of assistance when you go. If you're on assignment, you're blessed in that fact that you have a budget that you can go find somebody who's going to help you out. Geographic calls them fixers, and that's exactly what they do. They fix things for you. They find drivers, translators. They know who to bribe. They know the back doors. They know how to get you around obstacles. Oh, you mean from being chatty, gregarious, and suave? Yeah. Of course. How could you resist me if I was in your office asking you for an assignment and some money? No, I don't mean to make light. You have to see, a photographer, any successful photographer is a mosaic, right? Lots of bits and pieces. And too many people think they can get into this thinking that it's all about the pictures. It's not. You have to have a personality that sustains. You have to have a drive. You have to have, honestly, a ferocious work ethic. You have to be able to relate to clients, relate to people in front of the camera. You have to be able to make that happen quickly, right? The Vietnam thing that I showed you, you know, I worked with a bunch of veterans. I had never met them before. 6 of them came down to the Vietnam Wall. I had to shoot all 6 in about 2 hours. So I had to make something happen. So you have to be open. You have to be willing to go after something and be open yourself to a sense of embarrassment or failure or whatever it might be to try to make a bridge to somebody. And then also you have to have business sense, right? You have to stay involved. You have to, as I say, be comfortable with uncertainty. There's a whole bunch of bits and pieces to the photographer's brain or sense of survival. It's not just about pictures. There have been times, not many, you know, because I figure I'm there to do a job, so you kind of suck it up and do it, you know. There were times during the 9/11 project, I made the picture, but, you know, afterwards you just sat down and you started crying. There were pictures I made during that project that I was crying when I shot them, you know. And Danny, who I showed you, he has the mask card of Tommy. I'm friends with the Foley family. Joanne, their sister, came and posed for the giant Polaroid camera. She was weeping when I photographed her. I was crying, and we talked about it later, and I felt so guilty about it. And I asked her forgiveness, and she just gave me absolution. It was amazing. She just looked at me and said, "Joe, you did the right thing. You did what you came to do. You made a photograph. I'm thankful that you did." They hopefully meet in the middle. That's not a great answer, I know, but you know, there are photographers who are tremendously creative who don't have much technical ability, and you can hire that. You know, you can have this idea and assemble all the pieces of the puzzle to stand in service of your idea. So I would say that the idea does come first. You know, the idea is the thing that drives you, the mission, the story, the project at hand. And then everything flows from that. Hopefully you have the abilities within yourself to pull off the idea that you have. Hopefully there's a good marriage there. Creative lulls, I shoot my way through them. I just keep working. It's about the only thing I'm good at. You know, I put my head down and I keep working. And man, I've shot some shit. Oh my God, I just, you know, it's embarrassing sometimes how bad and you think to yourself, after 35 years, I should know how to do this. I should do this better. But no, you know, any photographer, I said this to the class earlier, any photographer that tells you that every time they take a camera in their hand, success happens, is lying to you. Absolutely, totally lying to you. This is a very situational art and craft. You have good days and bad days. You go out into the field and you don't feel well. You know, maybe your kids aren't doing well in school. At that point, you got to gut it out. You know, you got to fight your way to a photograph. And it's not like, you know, wandering the streets of Morocco in beautiful lights, making pictures because it makes you happy. That's wonderful. But that's the nirvana that occasionally might occur. The grist of this is hard work. Very hard work. Yes, sir. Oh, wow. It happens so often I don't even think about it anymore. I'm sure it's being infringed right now, you know. Almost none, you know.
Is that an invitation?
No. Here's the thing. I mean, social media can work, you know, is partly the culprit, you know, people grabbing stuff off the internet. But also social media can be your savior, because if you've got a tribe out there, like we have, our blog gets read by between 750 and 250,000 people a year, you know. And you have friends in the industry, and every once in a while I get a contact email saying, "Joe, is this your picture? It's being used XYZ way." You know, it's not that I don't care, but I gave up the ghost of being upset about it a long time ago because it's going to happen.
So you don't bother registering?
Yes, we certain strong pictures don't register the whole archive, but yes, we are involved in that. But the whole bloody thing, no. Well, certainly I do enjoy people and I do love photography, so that is kind of like the safety net, you know. And I also I have had to think about doing something else during the course of my career, and I just look at that and it just ain't going to work. So you really do have no choice but to keep going. And yeah, I mean, I'm not to be personal about it, but here's the thing, dude, I'm happy. I was miserable for a long time in my career for lots of personal reasons. And I'm the happiest I've ever been. And that translates right into the fact that if I have a bad day, you know, I still get to go home to Annie. And that's okay. You know, I've been doing this for 35 years. I'm going to have bad days. It's okay. It's okay. Oh, there's tons of stuff I'd love to shoot that I haven't shot. Oh, yeah. No, there's lots of projects. Lots of projects. Well, I want to keep the circus project going. And I want to extend that into the older circuses of China, Eastern Europe, Russia, India, and then do that kind of thing, kind of throw an arm around that, and then bring it full circle through the big top circuses, and now to the imagination part of the circus, which is pretty much represented by Cirque du Soleil. I think that would be a fascinating book, The Nature and Origins of the Circus. I think that would be really, really cool and really, really visual. I do need an assistant. Oh, here we go. All right, dude. Yes, sir. Sure. I mean, the nature of being a photographer is that you try to stand where they tell you you can't. It's whether you're on the ground or on a building. It just is, you know. But here's where we are. You know, I showed you the Queensboro Bridge picture. You know what I did to get up on the Queensboro Bridge? I slung a couple of cameras around me and a donkey bag. And I walked up onto the bridge and I met the crew and I said, hey, I'm with the Daily News. I'm going to go up with you guys. And they just shrugged at me and they said, all right. I didn't have a safety belt. I didn't have any safety precautions whatsoever. The bridge was being painted. I went up on the outside of the cable wire like this. And I kept sliding back down because the paint was so thick and wet. I got completely drenched in paint, but I finally made it to the top of the bloody thing. The last thing I showed you, the Prudential Tower in Boston, about 300 emails. $8 million in insurance. Different world. That Queensboro Bridge was back in the 70s. Just like, but the cool thing, the Empire State Building, there was a great man who was in charge of the mast operations at the Empire State Building. His name was Alex Smirnoff, and he had the soul of an artist, and he knew that the Empire State Building was designed, made to be photographed. And he just let me climb all over that building, and my name's on a single piece of paper. I call him up and say, yeah, I got a crew going up tonight. You can go climb. And I've climbed that antenna at least 4 times to the very top. In terms of real-time experience now, for you, or
Just in general, but also for me, sure.
Yeah. Everybody hear the question? It's basically like, how do you crack it open wider now? There's 2 sides to this coin. I don't think there's any better time to be a photographer. Right here, right now. It's amazing. The options that you have, the technology, the ability to forge your own destiny. You know, the downside is, how do you find a way to monetize those projects, that ambition, and find a funnel or an outlet for the work? It was easier in that regard because publications were more plentiful when I started. So, in terms of the publications world, what you suggest is a way to do it. I always used to tell young photographers, get yourself a job at a newspaper. That's hard to do nowadays because newspapers are plummeting and firing their staff. So what you do is I think you start to be proactive about your own destiny. You start to create proposals. You start to find contacts. You are relentless in sending proposals out to everything from newspapers and magazines to corporate entities, to NGOs, to places that might have a need for photography. You start small, you start regional, you try to get jobs in your local area, and then you try to expand beyond that as best as you can. You take every opportunity you can to get your work out. If you can put a show in your local Starbucks, do it, okay? The local library, do it, okay? Start a blog, it gives you a voice. Maybe only 10 people read it this week, 20 people might read it next month. Give yourself a chance, give yourself a platform. And hope for the best.
So, I know you have more questions for Joe, but I feel a little thirsty. If you have the red stamp on your hands, Nikon has invited us across the street to the Globe for a simple libation, a beer, a glass of house wine, a soft drink. All right, does that sound good? What do you think of Nikon hosting us? Yeah. Right? All right, so Joe, this has been fabulous and very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you. He's here, he's in the back of the room if you want to get with him. He's a font of knowledge. He's a very good photographer in his own right, and so please acknowledge him or get with him if you have any questions. But I bought this lens used at Adorama and bolted it to a D810 and then bolted that to the bottom of a helicopter. Shot this about, I wanted to generate some imagery on the lower part of Manhattan with the addition of the new Trade Center. So, but anyway, a long time ago, the first picture you ever shoot that anybody notices is of a Syracuse University bandsman whose pants fall down during a halftime show. You know you might be in for an interesting, spin of a career. I did go to Syracuse University. I came down to New York City. This was shot at the Hotel Beacon. Anybody know the geography of the city? Do you know the Hotel Beacon, 74th and Broadway? It's a pretty nice place now. It was a flop house back then. It was filled with hookers and pimps and prostitutes and cockroaches, and it was not a good place to live. But there were characters, and this is Ivan Bankoff, who was a vaudevillian, who was there. I shot everything I could when I came to New York City. Weather pictures, okay? Cats out on the sidewalk, sunny day, this type of thing that was grist for newspaper feature work back in the day. In New York City, you simply stepped over the dead bodies and got on the subway and went to work. It was not that big a deal, literally, to see a corpse in the city. It was a dangerous place back then. It was a little weird. People didn't go jogging in Central Park back then with the abandon that they do now. Let's put it that way. The subways have always been, I've always hung around on the subways. Dana Carvey in the subways. This is People magazine back in the day, sent me into the subways to come back with a picture that showed why New Yorkers were terrified of the New York City subway system. This is 3 a.m. on the IRT, man. And it was not a good time back then. It was definitely not. And then I went to Ringling Brothers. When Ringling Brothers moves into Madison Square Garden here, they stay for a while, right? So I always was fascinated with circus people, so I went over. And I got this done. This was my first kind of essay that ran in that's too generous a word, but I lied well, I didn't lie. I went to Ringling Brothers, and I said, I worked at the New York Daily News, which I did. I was not a photographer at the Daily News. I was a copy boy. But all I had to do was tell them I worked at the Daily News, and they were all over me. And so I spent a few weeks with the little clown, early experiments in lighting. This was a flash into an umbrella. I had no idea how much light was coming out, how little. It was basically like
I can't stand introducing people that don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do my best, all right? It's a true pleasure that we've been able to host Joe McNally. Special thanks goes to Nikon USA. We can see Nikon's here. Joe is a Nikon ambassador, and so he's been working closely with Nikon. And so at the end, Alex is here, happy to answer any questions about Nikon gear, etc. So we really appreciate you being here. Adds another dimension to our lectures. Now, as I like to say, Joe has that dream career that we all sort of fantasize about. Flying to exotic locations, working for National Geographic, Sports Illustrated, swimsuit models. And all we see is that one picture on the page. We don't see the lines at airport security. We don't see the tons of gear. We don't see all the phone calls that go into it. We don't see the jet lag. Well, you do see it a little bit on you this week, a little bit. We don't see all the work that goes into the photo beforehand, all right? And so what's great about Joe is with all of that success of having shot for top people for the last 35 years, he's literally just as eager as, I would like to say, some of the freshmen here at SVA are, the 17, 18-year-old students. Okay, he still gets up, he still looks out the window, he still tries to figure out what's the light doing, what can I do with it, and really tries to create something very exciting. And I think that's really the inspiration, okay? Also, thankfully, he loves sharing that love for light and love for photography. And we're fortunate for that. He's gracious and generous and a little bit funny. So, on that note, I think we're going to have a great time for about an hour 15 with Joe. And then at the end, there'll be a special announcement about why you have all been stamped and why we collected all of your DNA. Okay? So on the note, please help me welcome Joe McNally.
Okay, I think this is the microphone that works, right? Okay. All right. So thank you, Katrine, very much. Very gracious of you. As erroneous as your introduction was, I'm very happy for it. Thank you. Now, Katrine did allude to a caveman tool of a flash, that I started experimenting with back in that time. So, but I'm a generalist. I'm a committed generalist. There is not too much else to say. I mean, when you say like, oh, Joe, you've really made some interesting choices in your career. You've chosen to be a generalist. And I'm like, yes, I've made that choice. Just conscious decision on my part. No, that's a bunch of bullshit. I'm a generalist because I ain't good at any one type of thing enough to be just that. Right? If you call somebody, I ain't the best fashion guy, I ain't the best sports guy, I ain't the best portrait, I ain't any of that. I'm a Swiss Army knife of photography, which you might see tonight. You throw me at a picture, I'll go get you a picture, okay? I'm really tenacious about that. I fight on assignment for every scrap, every inch I can get out of my subject matter, and that's been the motif of my career. There's no arc of brilliance to this or anything at all like that. I want to debunk that early on, because if you hang around long enough in this business and you're still upright, people say, he's massively brilliant and talented. It's bullshit, You do what you do. You love this so much you can't stop. You've got no choice. When I teach young photographers, I say, look, photography is not something you do. Being a photographer is something you are, okay? And if you are a photographer, you're screwed, okay? You are screwed right to the wall because you got no choice. You have to go forward. You have to find a way. And that's kind of what I've been doing my whole career, okay? I shoot politics. I've done news stuff. Diana Ross. Who in the room is old? 1983 in Central Park. She got blown off the stage. I had $3,000 worth of damage to my cameras that night because I was massively unprepared for the rainstorm. I didn't listen to the weather report before I went. So my bad, okay? This was shot for People magazine back in the day when it was really a magazine. Okay, Carly Simon, okay, celebrity work, okay, Cher, okay, at the Morgan Penthouse with all of her hair. Oh my God. She looked at me and said, you've got 2 minutes. I'm like, Jesus, I'm all right, whatever, Lou Piniella, okay, being not so sweet Lou back in the day at Yankee Stadium. I show this because it's the only good sports picture I've ever shot in my life. If it moves, I generally can't shoot it. I admit that. I had a contract with Sports Illustrated for 8 years. I pulled the wool over their eyes. I was a contract photographer at Sports Illustrated. And the career, that's true, absolutely. The glamorous aspects, maybe we can talk about that this evening, because those are few and far between in the life of a photographer. So happy to be here tonight, honored to be here tonight, honored that you guys would come out on a Friday late afternoon in New York City and spend some time just talking about pictures. Very honored and very humbled by the fact that you would come here and spend a little time. To that end, I'll try to make this as informative and productive as I possibly can. We're a small enough group. It's a very informal group here, so I'm easy about any manner of questions during my presentation, after the presentation, totally comfortable doing whatever you would like to do or pushing this in a direction that you would feel might be beneficial. As far as I'm concerned, there are no secrets to this industry. Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. The evening just took a really fabulously interesting turn.
Sorry, guys.
How's it going, man?
We're going to go find a seat.
All right, go. How's it going, man? Yeah, right. All right, so the folks from Nikon just showed up. That's Mike Corrado and Mark Subin, both very dear friends from Nikon. I am a Nikon ambassador, happy to be one. I bought my first Nikon camera at Willoughby's 42 years ago. Okay, if anybody even remembers that name. Okay, a Nikkormat camera. I bought it in 1973. Okay, so I'm very thankful to the relationship I have with Nikon after all these years. I mean, I grew up on a magazine called Nikon World, if anybody's familiar with it. And back then, there were the heroes of the day in that magazine. You know, the Jay Maisel and Pete Turner and Eric Mayola, Michelle Cherevkov, the color heroes of the day. And so, you know, I thought to myself, God, if I could ever come up with a picture that might merit the attention of a magazine like that, it would be a career well spent. And all these years later, I have this amazing relationship with Nikon cameras, and so I'm very proud of that. And Alex, as already been indicated, is up here, and he's a great resource if anybody has any questions. So relating to questions, I'll throw out right now. Come on in, folks. Yep. Very informal. I'm going to obviously show some pictures tonight, talk about the life and career of a photographer. I'll move pretty quickly through that entire kind of 40 some odd years. If anybody has any questions during that, as I said, all welcome. Does anybody have any questions to kick off? Anybody have anything at all if we got our heads around it or discussed it tonight, they would feel that tonight would be time well spent? We good? Yes, sir.
What are you doing in post-processing these days? What software are you using?
What am I doing in post-processing these days? As little as possible. As little as possible. I suck at Photoshop, okay? We have a couple of young guys in the studio, our assistants, so I'm not playing dumb here. We do Photoshop on our pictures, but I would describe it as basic darkroom work. You know, it's tweaking, you know, kind of what you would do in the old black and white darkroom, you know. The thing about the way and it may be sort of antediluvian, but, you know, I started as a newspaper wire service photographer here in New York City. I was a copy boy at the New York Daily News in 1976, which is actually sort of embarrassing to admit, but there it is, okay? That was the city in the bad old days. The city was broke. That was the famous New York Daily News that published the headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." New York City was broke, you know. It was not a fun place to be at that time. And then I kind of advanced, you could say that, you know, I could put a gloss on it and say, well, I advanced from newspapers and into magazines, but actually the Daily News fired me. You know, so that's a big impetus to take a different direction, you know what I mean? You know, so I ended up shooting color for magazines. And in that time, you shot a transparency, and it was a done deal, right? Kodachrome, I shot thousands of rolls of Kodachrome for the National Geographic. They would go and get processed by Kodak and get dropped on your editor's desk, and it was done. They saw every frame you shot. So that's the school I kind of come out of. And so I hopefully treat digital the exact same way. As far as organizing, you see a software behind me here. I kind of migrated. I did use Aperture. Aperture is now, you know, deceased. And so now I'm experimenting with Mylio, which is a really fascinating software and a lot of fun to use. Anybody else? Get going here? All right, cool. So let me do this. I've got this kind of old school microphone here. Put it in here. So here we go, folks. Long, strange trip. That's the category that we're in here. Okay, I just shot this. I try to stay current, right? I just shot this. This is like old school and new school. meets up. This is a shot with a lens that's probably 20 years old. I bought it used at Adorama Camera. Speaking of Adorama, where's Jeff? The big guy, Jeff Snyder, is here. If anybody, Jeff is my camera consigliere, okay? If I got a question, I go to Jeff. If I need something, I go to Jeff. So